Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good morning, friends. I come to you with great alacrity. I'm just in a really good mood today, and I'm not sure why. It could be a few things. We're having some home remodeling projects done, and it's always kind of great when you get the home the way you want to do it. You usually do a few of those every year. Found out Joy's coming back for 4 days, and so always nice to see your daughter. Working on trying to get Karis back here as well, but Davidson's got a big reunion, so it trumped it. And one of my clients from Texas found out is going to pay us a personal visit. So I always love it when I get to meet families, whether it's podcast listeners or students or parents I'm working with. So looking forward to that this week on the 24th of May. So I'm just in a really good mood. Before we dive into today's episode, there are a couple of announcements I want to make and share with you. First one has to do with Speakpipe. If you've been a listener, you know we love Speakpipe. And we like it for a lot of reasons. Got really good feedback. That's very important. If we didn't get good feedback, then we don't care what we thought. We would nix it. That's part of it. But the other part is it makes us feel like a community to me. It's nice to hear other voices other than just the 7 co-hosts and whatever interviewee we happen to be interviewing. So the announcement is that we are going to Speakpipe for all questions moving forward. For some, that's disappointing because we do get some emails that say I'm too shy, I'm not comfortable saying this kind of thing. But we've also had some emails that have said, you know what, I'm really shy, but I asked my husband to do it or my friend to do it or my brother to do it. So if you're too shy to speak your question, just have somebody else do it. But that's how we will be taking all of our questions moving forward. And we have about 50 that have been sent in. So you guys have proven that that works for you. Once again, you just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK and leave your question. We're behind a fair amount right now, so we're going to do another round of recording, and in the next few weeks, we're going to probably go back to having a question on Monday and a question on Thursday, either that or 2 questions on Thursday, just until we get fairly caught up. My thinking with Speakpipe is I don't want you to have to wait more than 2 months to get an answer. And right now it'd probably be 3 months. And sometimes some questions are urgent. And I always feel bad about that because it's not fair to put a question ahead of somebody who's in the queue. You do need to know when you leave a question. It could be 60 to 90 days before we get to it. And that's just the best that we can do. So my second announcement has to do with a podcast I've recommended on here a few times called The Beat by Lee Coffin. It's Dartmouth Admissions. And Lee's going to be a guest on our podcast. And so it's going to be Julia Esquivel, myself, the two of us will interview Lee. Julia and Lee have a history. He used to work at Milton Academy where Julia works. And so they go back. And so I'm sharing this with you because we want you to send your questions in. And so if you go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, any question you have at all about Dartmouth or just about selective admissions, Lee's got 35 years experience and he's worked at multiple levels of selectivity at schools. He's been at the Tufts and the Connecticut colleges and Dartmouth. So he can handle just general questions, but I think his expertise would be around selective admissions. But if you have admissions questions or a question about Dartmouth, we've had requests before for spotlights about Dartmouth. This is your opportunity. We can answer questions. So please send them in. And we will get them on the air. We'll look forward to that, and we'll keep you posted on when that interview will occur. But this is one that you should be hearing in the next 60 days, not the next 6 months. All right, so today I want to just say a few things about early programs, early decision, and early action programs, and then we will have a second part of my interview with David Marcus, author of the book Acceptance. So the thing about early programs, well, first of all, let me just define them, because 95% of our listeners probably know the difference between early action and early decision, but they do confuse a lot of people. So both programs have early deadlines, meaning you have to submit your application early. They both have early notification dates, meaning you find out earlier than you would in regular admission if you were accepted, denied, or deferred. The difference being early decision is binding. You need three signatures, a student, a parent, and a counselor, saying you're committing to go. You're pulling your other applications. With early action, you're a free agent until May 1st. You can compare financial aid offers. You can travel and visit more schools. You can take another, usually another 6 months. And I say usually because, boy, deadlines are all over the place when it comes to early. Let's just take early action, for example. You have a date as early as October 1st for Georgia State right here in Atlanta. But that's rare. They're the only school I know with a deadline before the October 15th. But then you get your October 15th deadlines, like a University of Georgia or UNC Chapel Hill or University of South Carolina. Georgia Tech's mid-October. Notice any trend there? Southern schools tend to be the mid-October dates. And then you get a lot of November 1 dates. Lots, whether it's App State, Babson, Baylor, Caltech, Case Western Reserve, Chapman, Colorado College, Drexel, Elon, Florida Southern, Georgetown, Harvard, Howard, Indiana University, Lewis and Clark, LMU, Loyola Marymount, Macalester, Mercer, Morehouse, North Carolina A&T, North Carolina State, Northeastern, Pepperdine, Princeton, Santa Clara, SMU, Stanford, TCU, Ohio State, UTK, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Chicago. I'll just mention a few are Delaware, Denver, Maryland, Miami, Michigan, Minnesota Twin Cities, Notre Dame, Richmond, Vermont, Virginia, UW-Madison, Villanova, WPI, Yale. I wanted to do that a lot because I wanted you to see November 1 is a really, really common date. But there's some other off dates, like November 5th would be UMass Amherst. And then 15th, you come back and you get a decent number of dates for the 15th. Agnes Scott being one example, Cal Lutheran, DePaul, Hampton. It's the second most common date. Monmouth. I could go on and on. I'm not going to read them all. Just mention a couple more. Reed would be one. The St. John's programs, both in Maryland and in New York, they're both November 15th dates. UC Boulder, Tulane, Redlands. And I'm going to stop there because we could go on and on just with dates. But you get the sense. November 1, the most common, a few October 15th, one October 1. Then you get these, occasional dates that are off there. So it is confusing. And then we have some December 1 dates, like Colorado State, DePaul in Indiana, Furman, Ithaca in New York would be examples of December 1 dates. It's a pretty common date as well. Sewanee, Cincinnati. Second only, it's about November 15th and December 1 have about the same number of people. And then you do have a fewer, not very many December 15th dates, like College of Charleston would be an example of that. And that's kind of your early dates for early action. So anyway, early deadline, early notification, but you have until May 1st to make a decision. Well, let me say something about early decision. Early decision is only going to increase in its import and value to colleges. I want you to put yourself in the mind of an admission officer. What is the goal when you're in admissions? The goal is to bring in your class, right? As talented and well-rounded and in line with the institutional priorities that you're charged to go out and fulfill as you possibly can. That's the goal. The goal is not to let people know that they met some proverbial mythical standard of admissions and give them a trophy or ribbon or an acceptance letter. That's how an applicant perceives it. Did I meet the standard? Am I getting in or not getting in? That's not how you think in admissions. You think, I got to bring in my class. Well, that just gets harder and harder and harder when you see all the barriers that we talk about all the time on here. Everything from the enrollment cliff to the war against college. It's liberal indoctrination. So less people finding value in it. the cost of college, more people challenging it, more alternatives, certificate, badges, work programs. You don't need a degree, all of these things. And then on top of it, this is a big one, students applying to more and more colleges. The more students apply to more colleges, the less of a chance me individually as a recruiter I have of getting a kid. If I'm recruiting from a school where they apply to two schools on average versus 12, it's harder. But a lot of times those schools that have more applications have the kinds of students that can be competitive in my school if I'm at a highly selective or I'm at a competitive school, so I need to recruit there. But I know that my odds are going down to get each kid. So what does that mean? It means more emphasis on early decision, on binding programs. And I'm seeing that, and I know I'm going to continue to see that. I do not see that trend stopping anytime soon. I'm going to name a name here. It's a school that I love, but I do need to call them out. American University. I cannot tell you how many times I've had a family visit American University in Washington, D.C. Once again, a school I love. Shout out to my cousin Ellen, who went there and had a fantastic experience. But I can't tell you how many times I've had a family say, man, did they put the hard press on me for ED there? Like, that's just the routine when I have someone go to American. They come back and say, and you're going to see that more and more and more. I was just looking at a website of a school, the case for early decision. Schools are trying to lock you in, and you're going to hear more of that just because of all the reasons I mentioned. It's growing. It's going to continue to grow. There's no doubt in my mind. One of the things I think you're going to see, and I'm already starting to see it, is incentives, because they used to be against NACAC rules, but in 2019 that changed. Schools can now give incentives for early decision. For those of you who are podcast partners who donate to our podcast, the next audio file you're going to get, I'm going to talk about a school that is promising to meet the full financial need of any student who applies early decision. But if you don't apply early decision, you're likely to get a financial gap. And so we're going to talk about the pros and cons of that, and I'll tell you who it is and all of that. But that's the kind of thing you're going to see more and more and more incentives, because it's just really valuable to a school to be able to lock kids in. But the problem is it's just really, really, really hard. I know the students that we work with, not just me, but everyone else on my counseling team. I believe we had 30 kids that applied early decision this year, and counting early decision 1 and early decision 2. And what really struck me was how many really reputable schools never got a single early decision applicant from us. Really reputable schools. Like, nobody did ED to Chicago or to Duke this year. Nobody did ED to Columbia of the 30. I'm just, it's hard, because not only do you have to convince people to make a binding commitment, not look at anybody else's offer to you. Someone could throw a full tuition offer at you or $30,000. You're not able to compare that because you don't get to see it. You have to be ready. You have to know you're willing to commit. Usually September-ish, October at the latest. You got to be ready, have all your files ready to go, and have that mental state. Normally that means you visited and liked it well. You've been able to visit other places to compare it. But on top of all that, because there's certainly a lot of people, I literally just got out of a session where someone said we're trying to decide our early decision between Cornell and NYU. So there are plenty of people that do all that stuff. But then on top of that, you got to beat out all the competition. All the competition that you'll commit to them over everybody else. So a lot of schools, as much as they would love to get to lock people in, literally they can take one kid instead of 5 to get one, or 6 to get one. It makes your job so much easier to please all your stakeholders, let alone drive down your admit rates, and then improve your brand, and then make it easier to attract even stronger students while doing less work, because you don't have to admit as many kids. A lot of schools realize early action is probably the best we can do. Now, philosophically, public schools in general have been advocates of early action, because they believe their mission is to serve the entire student body out there, and they're uncomfortable with the fact that early decision kind of privileges the privileged, really, because you have to be in a certain financial state to not have to compare financial aid offers. And you can just commit and pay the price, whatever the school asks. So most public schools are not comfortable with that, with the exception of the state of Virginia that has 7 public schools that have ED, and more recently Vermont. And that's about it, certainly for flagship schools. You don't see it amongst public schools. So EA is common for public schools. But for private schools, you're seeing more and more schools are using early action and early decision, and in some cases, and early decision too. So I just jotted down a list of some of the schools. It's just a small list sampling that have early action and early decision. Notice these tend to be private schools: Baylor, Case Western Reserve, Chapman, Clark. That's Clark in Massachusetts, by the way. There's Clark here in Atlanta. Colorado College, Denver, Elon, Fordham, High Point, Howard, Lewis and Clark, Mercer, Northeastern, Rhodes, RPI, Santa Clara, Sewanee, Trinity, and San Antonio, U Chicago, U Miami, U Richmond, Vermont, Villanova, Tulane, and WPI. That's a small sampling of schools that have EA and ED. All right, now a couple of things. Sometimes when schools have EA and ED, they're using, you can pick your word. Some would call it a strategy. Some would call it clever marketing. Some would call it gimmickry. Some would call it manipulation. It's controversial, but they use EA to try to flip people to ED. The thinking is if they applied early, maybe they were just on the cusp of being willing to pull the trigger and convert to ED. So that's on the rise. More schools, not everybody on that list is doing that. In fact, I would say a minority of the schools on the list are doing that, but it is a tactic out there that's pretty common. Use EA to flip people to ED, ED2. You have to have ED2. So if people apply EA and send follow-up correspondence and say, if you were to convert to ED2, we can make this happen, blah, blah, blah. So that's happening. You need to lock people in. But there's something else that's happening with early action that I want to make you aware of. The early action admit rate is noticeably higher than the regular decision admit rate at schools. Let me repeat that. The early action admit rate is noticeably higher than the regular decision admit rate at multiple schools. Now, this is something I've known for quite some time, but I've taken it upon myself to ask quite a few different admission officers why that's true. Most of the time, schools won't share that. Sometimes they do. Colorado College does. And I appreciate the transparency because you can know, oh, wow, snap. Look at the admit rate here versus here in neon light telling me to apply early. And I wish every school would reveal their early action admit rate and their RD admit rate, but they usually don't. So what are the reasons why this admit rate is higher? Well, there's 2 main reasons that I hear from other people I'm talking to, and they make sense. The first is just simple. We see stronger applicants in early action versus regular decision, right? The person that has their act together enough to get everything in before, I'm not going to mention that long list of dates I said a second ago. The person that has their act together to get everything in by October 1st for Georgia State or October 15th, November 1, November 15th. That is the same type of student that has their act together in other things, tend to have a better transcript, better teacher recommendations, better grade trends. They're prepared. And so there's a differential there that's noticeable. It's not something that is incremental. It's something that is clear, distinct, and noticeable. It's something that I can't think of a time I talked to someone that told me that an early action student is generally not stronger than a regular decision student. Obviously, there's tons and tons and tons of exceptions. So that goes without being said. If it's a stronger student, schools are going to want to have the stronger students, right? These are academic institutions. But there's another major reason why schools have higher EA admit rates than RD, and I bet it's probably hard for you to guess. So let me share it with you. Colleges have learned they have a much better chance at yielding a student if they apply EA versus RD, early action versus regular decision. Yield can be a complicated word because in one sense it's a mathematical statistic, right? You admit 100 kids to half come, then you have a 50% yield. Do 70 come? You have 70% yield. Do 10 come? You have a 10% yield. But yield is also just used euphemistically for do people enroll. When you talk about yielding, it means they came to your school, they matriculated, they enrolled. And that's why I'm using it here. So when I say you have a better chance of yielding, you have a better chance of getting them to accept your offer and to matriculate. So the question is, why would a school have a better chance at getting a student to matriculate that applies early action versus regular decision? Some of it is potentially the student has more interest. Once again, they had interest in you enough to get their act together to prioritize you and get their application in for you. Sometimes in RD, you get people to just throw a bunch of applications in at the end, or they're late, or they're not organized, or they're not that disinterested in some cases, maybe not even sure if they even want to go to college. So that certainly plays a role in the process. But even more than that, it has to do with the fact that colleges can put in action a series of yield events to move somebody along the admissions funnel, to increase the probability that they will enroll in the school if they can get them into their pipeline earlier. And I just had a fairly lengthy conversation in the month of May with an admission officer about this. So what are these things I'm referring to? So let's just take a scenario here. A student turns their application in on October 25th for a November 1 date. Okay. Versus a student that turns it in on January 13th for a January 15th date. Big difference here. What can I do in those extra months as an admission officer? One, I can set up an interview system. Okay. And the interview can do a lot of things. It can elicit interest in us as you learn more about us. And you don't have to use your admission staff. You can use students for this. You could use alumni, in some cases, faculty even. You can get them back on campus or get them to campus. Use social media, use direct mail, use email, get them back on campus or to campus. And there you can have them sit in classes. You can set up a scholarship day or a scholarship weekend for people that meet your priority date. So you already incentivize them. If you meet this priority date, you're going to be prioritized for scholarship, and we're going to have scholarship day, scholarship weekend. Usually those involve interviews, but it could be a series of other things as well. Could also involve sitting in class, could involve panels, it could involve meeting professors, lots of things. Speaking of that, you can do individual follow-up with a professor, with students in their area of interest. So as I talk with admission officers about why they like EA over RD, they sometimes mention that it helps spread out the application file reading. So rather than having this glut or torrent of apps that come in the week before the regular decision deadline, making it insanely difficult to get through all the file reading, having more of an even flow coming in October, November, much better than having them come in late. It makes it easier to file read. But the biggest thing I hear is stronger applications get submitted and better chance of yield because we can work them into the admissions funnel and move them along our continuum, along our path. So just a few thoughts percolating in my mind on early decision or early action. Thought I'd share them with you. Hope they were of interest.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Well, friends, let's transition to my interview with David Marcus. Hopefully you heard part one. We got great feedback. About 4 people reached out to us, which is pretty good for a first part of an interview, to say that they really liked it. And because we know if 4 people reach out, then, that's whatever, that's another 400 that just didn't reach out because only 1% of people respond. So in part 2, David talks about chapter 7 of his book. And all of his books have these really clever titles. You can tell he's a writer and he's working with a talented team. But this one looks at the industrial complex of college. What is that? David talks about what he was trying to convey in chapter 8 of his book, which is called Donating Blood is Not an Extracurricular Activity. David shares his 5 big takeaways from his book. He talks about the value of being a big fish in a small pond. He talks about the importance of picking a college that is a fit for your values, in alignment with your values. Listen and enjoy. Another chapter I really liked a lot, chapter 7. I like the name of it. I liked how you described it. And it's called the Admissions Industrial Complex. Talk to us about what you were trying to convey in this chapter, Dave.
Sure. So this is something you're very familiar with. It's NACAC, the National Association of College Admission Counseling, and basically they have regional meetings, and then they have a conference every year in different parts of the country. And Smitty, the counselor, went to this conference. I went to it too, and it's a fascinating place where it's sort of like this kind of bazaar of this Turkish bazaar of sellers and buyers, of counselors and of admissions people, and they're sort of doing this ritual, this courtship, like schools are sort of telling how great they are, and the counselors are trying to get in a word edgewise and mention this particular student. And I'll tell you, this is a fairness issue, because good private schools and good aggressive public schools will send not only director of counseling, but a few counselors to fairs like this, for the knowledge, for the networking, for the ideas, for all that stuff. And a lot of schools just don't bother. And I think it's really, I actually think it's important to spend taxpayer money, if you're a public school, getting your counselors out there so they're really familiar with the latest in admissions trends. So they really know who the dean of admissions is at a bunch of schools. And so, but what I did in this chapter was I tried to show that something you've talked about, this is a business. I love higher education. I'm fascinated by higher education. But ultimately, there are buyers and sellers, and the families are both consumers and sellers, and same with the colleges. The colleges court these kids, and they need more and more and more applicants, because they've got to impress their alumni, impress their donors, and even sometimes it affects their bond ratings and so forth. But then they want to get a lot of applicants, and then they want to reject them because it makes them look better. And there's nothing kind of evil about this. It's just that's colleges, even the nonprofits, it's a business. So I tried to show this kind of massive NACAC, this massive fair of counselors from all over the country, and college admissions people from all over the country, and the people who sell software and other services, and just show that when you have a good counselor who really knows the field, it helps to have a personal contact at some of these schools. And if not, at least they know kind of, what schools are looking for what and who's changing and so forth. Now, I want to emphasize, Smitty did this ethically. Smitty the counselor, got to know a lot of admissions people, and some of them didn't want to hear from him and didn't want to hear recommendations. But some of them said, look, you're representing a middle-class public school, middle mixed public school. We want to hear you honestly, candidly, year after year, tell us if we're missing or overlooking a student who's really special, or if there's some student who has some terrible thing has befallen the family. We want to know. So Smitty mentioned at this fair to a couple of places, look, this kid so-and-so is applying, and his grades could have been a lot better in 11th grade, a crucial year, but his father was involved in a kind of strange financial thing and just disappeared. Maybe was in Greece, maybe not, family's not sure, just literally disappeared, vanished, leaving the family with some debts and leaving, sort of the authorities wondering where he was. That's not the kid's fault, but you can imagine when dad disappears, the son's grades do tend to tumble.
No. Thanks for sharing that. There's this whole complex out there, and colleges, it's really on nonprofits. The way a lot of times they'll look at it is, we have a mission to serve people, but we can't serve people if we don't exist, or if we don't exist in a healthy way, meaning that financially we're able to pay our bills. And so there are a number of things that they do to make themselves healthier in the marketplace so that they could carry out their mission more effectively. But it can be difficult if you're just not thinking of a school as a business, because these are all business practices. So this next chapter I want you to comment on, chapter 8, is donating blood in extracurriculars. So this is another time when I have referred to this. I oftentimes tell people when they're filling out their activities list, don't put down donating blood. Not that it's not important, but something that's 30 minutes a year doesn't constitute an activity. But what did you have in mind with this one, David?
Well, I almost called it the laundry list chapter. So when I go on the road and speak to students and parents, and I love doing it, it's really fun, but inevitably someone will say to me, the Common App is really unfair. It only has 10 spaces, 10 spots to list extracurricular activities. And this in the chapter in the book, a kid said, is donating blood and extracurricular? Ask that. And I always say, colleges, these admissions people are not naive. They don't expect that you can be in the Key Club and the Spanish Honor Society and the Engineering Society and the Robotics Club and give actual, real, meaningful time to each activity and actually still take classes and still eat 3 meals a day, more or less, and still sleep more than an hour a night. So this chapter is about this kind of compunction, this kind of feeling of so many students. I've got to list everything I've ever done. And Smitty says you should, at 17 years old, you are not a CEO of a multinational company. Your resume, your CV should be no more than 1 page long. Your activities should be just the ones you really care about, not the ones where you go and eat donuts, once a month at a club. There's nothing the matter with that. You're a teenager. That's fine. But something you really have invested some time and energy and thought into. And I always say to students, you should be a leader in something by the halfway through 12th grade. But I don't mean you should be president of a club or VP. I mean, you should have had some kind of impact, some kind of thing that students did. So there's a girl in this who raised money for refugees. She didn't brag about it. She just was really upset about the condition of refugees. And she didn't even mention it at first. And then her counselor said, wait a minute, like I remember seeing you at this fundraiser and you guys raised $15,000 by having a dance at school. And she said, well, yeah, I did that because I just thought we should do it. That's genuine. I hate the word passion because passion's become one of many sort of college applicant cliches. But you should do something because you care. You should do something because you want to make a difference. You should do something because it pushes you versus your community or pushes your classmates.
Yeah, and this leadership, point is one that I think also sometimes is sloppily articulated. We had a great question from a listener that came in not too long ago saying, does everybody have to be a leader? Like I listen to admission officers and they make it sound like they want leaders. What's wrong with other types of people that have other gifts? And one thing I didn't say, I thought about later, a lot of times I think there's a confusion between leader and impact. So college admission officers want people that will have impact. So it could be a quiet student in class and a teacher could say, the student is a little bit more reserved, but when they speak, wow, is it ever profound? And it oftentimes will change our whole conversation for the rest of the class. That's going to be very impressive to colleges. Is that leadership? Well, indirectly, yeah, but it's not what people would think of leadership. It's impact. And that's sometimes where I think the confusion. Yes, colleges are absolutely looking for impact, and that can happen from introverts and extroverts in different ways. Sometimes it's your more tangible, concepts of leadership, things like presidents and starting organizations, and sometimes it's movers and shakers who are the next that move the head in more subtle ways. So, point well taken.
So, and I'll just give you an example really briefly about that. So I heard that discussion. I like the way you emphasize impact. Leader is not, we tend to think of a leader as somebody who's God forbid, running the House of Representatives in Washington or something like that. But leader in a school is much more subtle, and colleges understand this. So in my book and in kids I've met around the country, there's a kid who sees somebody being bullied and just steps up or speaks out. And so in this book, this jock who every teacher sort of dismisses for a while, he is a leader because he sees a couple of kids who are suffering at home, and he knows from his own cousins what happens when parents are really, really into drugs and really kind of not present. And he just, in his understated way, he just steps up for a couple of kids at the school and says to other people, "You're not going to bully them. You're not going to bother them. Just think about, you need to understand what they're undergoing at home." That's a leader as much as someone who founds a club and becomes the president of it because it looks good on college applications.
That's a great story. I'm glad you shared that. That's exactly the point I was trying to make. So there's a couple other chapters. I'm not going to ask you to comment on these, but a couple other of my favorites. One's called "We Are Looking for the X Factor." Another's called "She Would Have Been a Slam Dunk." I love those chapters as well. But I want to get to your 5 big takeaways from your research, both from your book and your experience. So let's kind of go through these one on. I'll mention one, and I'll just let you share whatever you want to say about it, David. But I know one of your big takeaways, both from experience as a parent as well as research for the book, is it's about fit, not the brand. What do you want to say about that?
Well, you've made that case so beautifully in the podcast, and your listeners are familiar with it. So I will just say, I was going to skip it entirely, but I'll say this. I've met students who do get into the best known school. Like well, you and I have this in common also. I worked at a boarding school. I had a fellowship to work at a boarding school, Deerfield Academy. And one of my beloved students got into Harvard undergrad, but then she got a Moorhead scholarship to go to the University of North Carolina. She was not from North Carolina. She had not lived in North Carolina. She was from the Northeast. She went there instead of Harvard. And guess what? That's a great public school, but it's not Harvard in people's mind. Guess what? Years later, she ends up at Harvard Medical School. She went to UNC instead of Harvard undergrad, and she ends up at Harvard Med School. So we have to be really careful. We are a very brand conscious society. We've decided over the years that certain cars are sexier or better or more interesting than other cars, not because of safety, not because of convenience, but just because they're great at branding themselves. And colleges are great at branding themselves too. And I know so many people who went to schools that are not on the sort of number 50, decal list, but they got incredible educations. And sometimes, frankly, you go to these big universities and you're taught by grad students, and the great professors are off doing great research. And it's better to be a star at a lesser known school. Or if you don't get into a place, your life doesn't end. And I'll make a personal confession here. When I was in high school, at this not very good high school, as I said, I had to go to Yale. Now, partly it's because I love the color blue. That's their thing. I love Bulldogs. But I just became obsessed with Yale in a very unnatural way. And so much so that I talked myself into an internship in my senior year at the Yale Daily News, the student newspaper. And I actually lived on campus for a while and did that. And then I was crushed when they didn't just like defer me or waitlist. They rejected me outright. I got into Brown, which was far less competitive, as I said. But by my senior year, I became president of my class. And I realized that although I had been fixated at 15, 16, 17 years old on a certain campus, mine was the right one. But I know so many students who don't choose or don't get into the well-known school, but they just excel at, you name it, like Kenyon or all kinds of places. Like I'll mention later, Hobart Williams Smith, where I've seen kids turn to, actually great students, or McAllister. You can go around this country, as you said, there's so many schools and schools abroad, and you don't have to have the brand. So, but my more important, do you want me to go on with my other points?
Yeah, but no, I'll make a comment. So a couple of things there, and I really appreciate your point. Even that I said, earlier, we don't rank churches. Why we rank in colleges? I actually got that from Stephen Antonoff, who I've had on the podcast before. And another point Antonoff brought out, and he's been doing this over 40 years. He said, I used to think there were probably 25 really, really good schools. And after 40 years of doing this, I realized there's at least 150 first choice schools, depending on, what that unique each person's looking for. And when I talk about this, it's really hard for me to strike the right balance because I'm not saying for someone not to be aspirational. I'm not saying for someone not to apply to a highly selective school that they have, the possibility of getting admission to and looks like it could be a good match. I'm not saying that. But you hit on a point that's really important to me. Your life doesn't end if you don't get in. And I'll go a step further. You're not on a different career trajectory. And that's what people think. Somehow they think that, oh, well, I thought the sky was the limit for my career. And now I guess I guess I'm going to have to settle for accomplishing less in life. That's just a bunch of malarkey. And to use a Joe Biden term. And, I don't want people limiting themselves like that. That's ridiculous, And the other thing I don't like about it is there's some inherent entitlement in that. Because one of these days, they're going to get a job and someone's going to be their boss who's graduated from like a regional public or something. And they're going to be disillusioned. You're going to be like, this is not the way the world is supposed to be. Like there's some inherent entitlement that if I go to X school, the Red Sea parts and that's just not how life works. And I think people are underestimating their own agency and the role their own decisions are going to make in their career trajectory. So that's one reason why I'm so passionate about it. And the third reason is I see the toll it takes on kids' self-esteem. Kids are literally erecting this standard. Like I referred earlier to the Olympics. It's like, to me, it's like if I don't get an Olympic gold medal, I'm a loser. Like, this is ridiculous. So then we have a lot of kids walking around who should be feeling great about themselves, who are feeling, bedraggled and beaten down. And I want the college experience to be a confidence enhancing, not a confidence debilitating experience. And one way to do it is not to say to myself, well, if I don't get in the top 1%, I'm a loser. So that's one reason why I feel so passionate about it. But also, we know it's true. There are certain environments that if they're right for you, you'll thrive and you'll reach your full potential. And for one person, maybe they need to be in a small classroom with discussion-based classes, in a more bucolic remote setting. Maybe that's their environment to thrive. Maybe for somebody else, it's a completely different environment. But I would never say selectivity doesn't count. But selectivity is not the be all and end all. There's so many other fit factors. In a lot of ways, you could almost liken it to a job. People, generally speaking, would like to get paid more than less when they're taking a job. But any experienced person knows that there's a lot of factors besides pay that are going to determine your happiness. Maybe if you like the work that you do, maybe if you like the hours they work, if you like the people you work with, your job description, your chance for upward mobility. All I'm saying is let's incorporate all these other fit factors and not just, genuflect to the altar of selectivity.
Right. And I will add, we're in a podcast like this by nature, we tend to be talking about sort of the students who are the top of their class or parents who generally are attuned to this process. Either they have money or they're very fixated on this. And so if we should also mention that, college is life-changing for students who are first generation, students who don't have the years and traditions and decades or generations of going to college. So either way, they're going to do, if you go to a school and you give your all, that's great. The problem is we focus in the society on getting in, but not when you get in, when you're there for 4 years or so, making the most of every experience. We can talk about that another time. My next two things are actually almost sort of contradictory. Do you want me to mention those?
Yeah, let's do it. Go ahead.
They're going to sound contradictory, but they're not. So my second thing is that the whole college admissions process, we've made it about SAT scores or ACT scores or take the test or don't take the test and GPA, but we've totally subverted it. It's actually, this is what I learned from watching this counselor for 2 years, this great counselor. It's this magical process of self-discovery. We live in a society that, unlike places in Africa, unlike places around the world, we don't have a lot of rites of passage, real rituals. You might, if you're Jewish, you might have a bar mitzvah at age, or bat mitzvah at age 13, or you might, you might have a communion. But what is a rite of passage for adolescents in this country? It's getting a driver's license. But really, the process of applying to college is thinking, who am I? What are my dreams? What do I want to be? How do I envision myself? What are my values? And so if it's done right, it's this amazing conversation in a student's head. It's this amazing discussion between a student and a family. It's this amazing thinking about, do I want to be in the city? Do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be a lawyer? Do I want to be working for a nonprofit? And that's fantastic. That's what it should be about. And ultimately, it's not about the diploma the decal you snagged for your car, but about what happens to you in that year or 6 months or 2 years of visiting schools or thinking about schools or going online and looking at schools. That's what it's about.
Well, one of the points you made is visit different campuses. And I think this is extremely important. I think this is a great thing for a 9th or 10th grader to do, especially if they are ready to do it and willing to do it. And, you can save a lot of money. You can learn a lot about yourself by visiting a wide range of different kinds of schools. And I'm talking about, in most instances, not all, this can be done without hotels even. These can be day trips. Of course, it depends where you live. And certainly shouldn't include airfare. But what am I talking about? Large schools, of course, small schools, urban, rural, college towns, small city, large city, women's college, Black student, HBCU, Hispanic serving institutions, schools with a lot of rah-rah, schools that blend into the city versus ones that are more enclosed, more of a bubble, more distinct campuses, a tech school, and community college, which I know you want to talk about in a second. When that makes sense, that can be an option. But just a wide assortment of different kinds of schools. This can save people so much money, so much time before you're flying around the country only to get to a place that you don't like. So I think it's a great thing for 9th and 10th graders to do. When I'm working with the family, I love for them to get on as many different campuses as they can close by that are different. And tell me what you liked and didn't like. That's going to help me to help you more than anything about putting together a calls list that's going to be, meet your needs. Friends, this concludes the second part of what is a 3-part interview. We hope you'll join us next week for the final part. On Thursday's episode, Dave and I will discuss the latest moves by the DeSantis administration to defund diversity initiatives in Florida. But we will mostly focus on a blog article by Rick Clark that looks at what are the 2 most important letters when it comes to admissions in the alphabet. Lisa will answer a Speakpipe question that Lee sent in about helping a student with learning differences. We'll continue with part 2 of the 3-part interview I do with Gus Resendez about the pros and cons of a co-op-centered education. And I finally complete my spotlights for my trip to Southern California in December, where I visited 9 colleges, a flying program called December Fest, which I highly recommend. And we'll look at Scripps College. Linda and I will do that, and that'll be a 1-parter. I'm actually capable of doing a 1-parter. Friends, I want to leave you with a famous quote. And this comes from a high school basketball coach called Tim Noetke. He's actually the head coach of a boys basketball team at Marion High School. And I hope I don't butcher this. I'll do my best. Mishawaka, Indiana. Noetke led Marion to 3 state championships. And Noetke made this quote a while ago. I think it was 2007. Don't quote me on that. And then Kevin Durant made it famous because he's oftentimes quoting it. But the quote is simply this, as I believe it applies to life, let alone this college process. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Did you catch that? Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff. Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.